Jordan, welcome to Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good to be out here on your home turf in San Francisco, California. Not just the Bay Area, but San Francisco proper. I have to. The first question I have to ask is, where are we right now? Because I was somewhat familiar with this place before I moved away. This is a fairly prominent makerspace in the city, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at 100 Hooper Street in downtown San Francisco, which is kind of near the design district. Lots of PDR or manufacturing-related kind of space here. As you mentioned, there's 2 different maker studios here, which has been really cool. We've actually collaborated with one of them that's on the same sort of block as us. It's brand new space. So it's very rare to find like good manufacturing, hardware-oriented space, especially in the city of San Francisco. That isn't, an old warehouse that, it doesn't have heat or AC or anything like that. And so one of the big, things about finding this was that, floor-to-ceiling glass. It looks, beautiful inside. It's great for employees and people who want to come work here. It makes them want to be here. Tons of open floor space behind us that you can't see right now. But it's all workshop space. And then upstairs, we have all our desking and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a great separation, and the location is perfect. Right next to Caltrain. So if you want to come work at Rapid, and if you live in the South Bay, you're a 3-minute walk off getting off the train. And
you can hear one going by right now. I mean, not only the Caltrain, but just to provide some context of how central this place is. I mean, the Giants Stadium is right over the way. The new Golden State Warriors Stadium is just down the way. Like, it's kind of a unique spot to have a maker space like this.
Yeah, which is what was so cool about it, right? To us, I mean, the first time I walked in here, I said, this was it. And we looked at 10 other spaces, and the location, the accessibility to the highway is right there, all 3 of them right there, and just the different feel of walking in here than a typical sort of manufacturing kind of shop. So it also serves as a show place for our customers. We have a lot of customers who come here to do FATs and things like that before we deploy on their sites, and they love being here. And that's really fun. Also, is that we host events here for our customers all the time, and it's just a cool place to be.
Well, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together until I literally pulled up here like an hour ago. I'm like, oh yeah, I've been here a lot before.
Yeah.
So. Well, we want to talk about Rapid Robotics today, but before we get there, I have to ask you about your background, because as I was doing my research before this, you founded a company called Livefire, which I believe you sold to Adobe.
Yes.
And it's the largest cloud-based content and community platform on the web for marketers and publishers. My question is, how do you go from that to robotics?
That's a great question. It starts with after doing MarTech for 12 years, much of it at Livefire as the founder and CEO, and then as a general manager over 3 business units at Adobe, I was pretty done with marketing technology.
Sure.
And had never actually meant to get into MarTech. It was kind of an accident that the market was there for the technology we were building. And then, of course, when we were acquired by Adobe, I saw an opportunity to get out of the pure software and marketing space. And the reason I chose robotics, I mean, it was a 2-year journey after the acquisition by Adobe of trying to figure out, I knew I wanted one thing very specifically, which is I wanted to have an impact on the real world. And, marketing to me at the time, it was, a hot space for SaaS, and, we built a great business and all of that, but I never felt like what we were doing was valuable to society. And so taking the lessons learned of starting and operating an enterprise software business with a SaaS model, I started looking at all the spaces related to our physical lives. So energy, from energy to supply chain, warehousing, and manufacturing. And, to me, manufacturing represents the lifeblood. It's the starting place of pretty much everything that makes our society run. It also contributes about 14% of the GDP of the country.
Yeah.
And so it is a massive space that needs to grow very aggressively. And in the traditional ways of deploying automation and robotics, I mean, there was no way it was going to grow. The labor shortage is growing at about 25% per year in the U.S., and the number of robots installed per year is growing at a rate of 2%. And so you don't see any possible outcome where robotics workforces could actually have an impact on our economy unless there is scalability. So creating scalability means, one, making it affordable, two, making it highly repeatable. So using new technologies that we are deploying that enable the robot to sort of self-learn and adapt to its environment with human instincts, as opposed to being pre-programmed and like hard-coded to do a job. And that makes it more scalable. So you can take one work cell that's trained on a type of part, and you can extrapolate that and deploy multiple robots that are doing the same thing with very little additional overhead. And until we get to that level of scale where a customer can deploy 100 robots for the same price and the amount of time it would take them to deploy 4 or 5 in the traditional way, that's the only place that scalability is going to come from, and that's the only way we're going to have an actual real impact on the GDP of this country, on the competitiveness of our manufacturing operations against globalization, and de-risk supply chains. I mean, we've all seen over the last few years incredibly harmful disruptions to supply chain, and it just seems to just keep on happening, starting with COVID and then the Suez Canal, being shut down from a boat getting stuck, and now the war in the Middle East, and all of these components. There is no control over any of those things that happen around us, and so in order for us to have a reliably growing and authoritative manufacturing sector in the U.S., we have to localize, right? We have to make more reliable supply chains, and also to keep prices down and keep inflation down, and all of those things happen from localizing, manufacturing operations. And so anyway, you asked the question, why did I switch? You can kind of tell probably from my passion around this, that impacting our physical lives and how we interact with each other and the spaces around us was prime for what I was looking for. And when I found robotics and found this opportunity and met who ended up being my founding team members of Rapid, it was a big moment for me because I didn't understand robotics. At the time, I had taught myself everything I could about manufacturing. I had visited 30 some odd manufacturing facilities and done all of that, understood the problem. But in terms of the technology and the capabilities, that required, having the right people on my team. And that's one of our core values at Rapid, actually, is diversity of background, right? And because the more opinions and experiences that people can bring to the table, the better decisions you make. And so where, I could bring all of the ideas around how to make a profitable business model out of what is now called Robotics as a Service, or RaaS, right? Which at the time actually didn't have a name in the market. In order to do that required different kinds of thinking than what, 2 robotics PhDs starting an AI robotics company would have brought to the table 5 years ago.
So one thing I have to ask then, because you're hitting on a lot of topics that are near and dear to the heart of the manufacturing happy hour audience. One thing they might not be as familiar with is doing something like this in an environment like San Francisco as well. Because one kind of a personal question I have for you is, are you seeing other people getting on board? I don't want to call it a manufacturing or hard tech bandwagon, but are you seeing other people that have spent a long time in software or MarTech or these other, let's be honest, non-physical industries? Are you seeing other people being like, you know what, I'm ready for manufacturing? What are you seeing out here?
So, it's funny. I actually don't know anybody else like myself who has gone from one completely unrelated industry into manufacturing and robotics. A lot of it I think stems from the fact that I'm not an engineer, right? And so I'm looking when I was looking for the next thing, I was looking for specific market conditions and specific needs in that market, and whether or not there was a technology solution to be had, and whether or not there was a profitable business model that was also deliver return on investment very quickly for the customers and allow them to scale at the levels they need to, while also delivering enough revenue to support a growing business. And so that, that dynamic is tough. And, for me, that was how I approached it, though. And if it just happened to be robots in manufacturing, where the opportunity was, then I'm going to go deep on that, right? And I'm going to learn everything I can. And more importantly, I'm going to surround myself with people who have the kind of experience directly with robotics, which, and the way I approached it and the way I told investors who asked that same question, we were closing our seed round, our Series A round, our Series B round. That was a question I got all the time. What gives you the right to start a robotics company? And what I always said is the robot doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The robot doesn't matter. Like, we can use any robot on the market, from cheap Abos all the way to Fanics and Yaskawas and URs. Like, we can use them all. And so the robot is a tool at the end of what we are doing, which is building intelligent software to run that robot in such a way where it doesn't require any programming, and it handles variability in the work cell environment like a human would. And so I don't view it as, just because I don't know how to program a robot, which I kind of do now, by the way, because others on the team have taught me. But it doesn't matter. Right? Because our customers don't know how to program robots. They don't care how it works either. They just want the solution to be valuable, profitable, reliable, and fast and scalable, right? Like, all of these things. And so that doesn't take somebody being an expert in robotics to do that, as long as you surround yourself with people who know how to build the software for the robots, right?
So let's jump here to the present day. And you kind of probably answered a little bit of this in that last one, but how do you describe Rapid Robotics as if you're having a drink with someone at, I don't know, Harmonic Brewing's right around the corner from here? There's a lot of good spots around this area. How do you describe what you do as if you're hanging out with someone at a bar?
Well, first I would say, if we're talking business at a bar, I want a margarita.
Okay.
That would be to start. And, and then I would say, if somebody asked, what does Rapid do? I would say we are a company that develops software that provides human instincts to a off-the-shelf robotic arm. And those instincts are directly related to how to operate manufacturing operations that are common across, almost every sector. So that means, instead of having a human put, a piece of plastic into a machine 100 times, or put a package of lunch meat into a box 1,000 times a day, that stuff their robot should be doing, right? Their humans are high value, and there are not enough humans who want those jobs. And so in order to keep up with production requirements, their automation is required, and we make it affordable and fast with the same level of reliability, or even more so in a lot of cases than what a human brings to the table.
And you've always had the same mission here at Rapid Robotics, but as I understand it, you're going through a refocus right now in terms of what you're doing and what you're focusing on in the market right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that story, where you were and how you got to where you are now?
Absolutely. So started the company about 4.5 years ago, and the original intent of the company hasn't changed, which is delivering the world's largest labor workforce that is fully automated. And so in order to do that, the first thing we had to do as a company was develop all of the internal tools for automating the deployment process as much as possible. So it was process automation, internal tooling, 24/7 support dashboards to manage all of our customers' equipment and make sure we could do remote support, and basically all of the cloud infrastructure for communicating with those robots and for teaching them new things remotely without having to go on site. So that was the first 3.5 years of the company, and we had a lot of success doing this. We could, and still could deploy 25 to 40 robots a month, which is far more than most systems integrators. So we could close a deal, and 3 to 4 weeks later, deploy that system to the customer site, having it produce real parts. And so that was a huge step change from the 12 to 18 months that a systems integrator might take, given their wait times and all of that. And so that was huge. Now, in order to solve this problem, this is not a dozens or hundreds of people problem, right? This is a massive, the labor shortage is upwards of 700,000 unfilled positions right now in manufacturing alone. So this is a hundreds of thousands to millions of workers problem. And so in order to solve that, what we looked at is said, okay, deploying 30 or 40 a month and having to hire deployment technicians as we do those in order to get more and more scale, that is, deploying 100 a month is not our goal. And so we could keep hiring more and more and more deployment technicians to deploy these robots. But at the end of the day, this should be a technology solution. And so the refocus of our resources and all of our efforts is on maturing and making much more robust our computer vision technologies that enable us to see what's happening in the work cell and respond in real time to what we're seeing. And this is a set of solutions called the Rapid ID suite, right? And so Rapid ID means rapid identification, rapid grasping, so we can see a part, we can pick it in motion, static, anything, and place it accurately where it's supposed to go. And so that refocus is around core IP around computer vision and training models and things like that enable the fast onboarding of new parts with zero programming at all on the robotic side. And so that focus with that enables us, as we scale, we're going to be deploying thousands of robots a month. And in order to solve the labor crisis, the only way to do that is with technology that scales in such a way where it's easily repeatable, and you can fill that labor shortage with thousands of robots, not with dozens or hundreds.
Well, one thing that I think is unique about your refocusing story that hasn't come up yet is you didn't do this out of like necessity of being a startup and the funding runway was running dry. You did this because you knew you needed to refocus on your mission. So tell me a bit more about this. What was like an investor's reaction to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, our internal investors, our existing board and existing investors. You can look online. We closed a $40 million round in like 2.5, 3 years ago, something like that, a Series B round. And so we had a lot of cash. And the trick was where and how do you deploy that money in order to get the best outcome? At the time, it was all about growth at all costs. So our new investors and our board and the market was saying, hire, 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 grow at all costs, screw the burn rate, right? Like, let's just build up this team to go to market. And we were closing a lot of deals. The problem was those deals were not profitable enough. We weren't building a balanced business because we were spending so much money on marketing and sales team and SDRs and all of the components that go into it. And so we hit the pause button when our burn rate got to the point where it's like our revenue is growing like really, really well, but the burn rate is growing even out of whack with that. And so we took a hard look and said, if we don't start taking more control of how much money we're spending, then we're going to end up like you name the number of robotics companies and other kinds of companies that think, well, the market dynamics will change. The sales process will get easier as more customers understand more. Well, I don't like running a business relying on external factors to come into place. And so it was a 6-month-long planning process, working with our board, with our investors. And so when they saw us execute on this transition and bring our burn down to 10x lower today than it was 6 months ago.
Wow.
And do it without losing a single solitary customer and maintaining the levels of support and that revenue, we are close to profitable. And now also with building, all of this new tech and refocusing our resources on the new tech that enables us to scale without continuously growing the team with every deal that we close, right? So the scalability of the solution to make up for not having to hire as many people is what drives profitability. So our internal investors are thrilled, right? Because the new investor market is not about growth at all costs.
Right.
The new investor market is very clearly about balancing your business and having your CAC ratios be relevant to, if you're spending $100,000 to close a deal in total and the deal is worth $120,000 a year, that's not a good deal, right? And so by changing our form of operation and our focus, internal investors were thrilled. New investors, we're not raising right now, but when I'm talking to new investors to introduce them to the business and I talk about this transition, the reaction has been incredibly positive. I've done a lot of fundraising in my career, and I've always found that transparency with investors is absolutely the best way to go. So sitting in front of investors, and I was like, this is Rapid 1.0, and what we're working on now is Rapid 2.0, and here's why, and here's the transitions that we made and the hard decisions we had to make. The amount of respect from new investors saying, I wish every one of my companies would do that. We had one investor ask if I could come do a masterclass with the rest of his companies because he's watched 4 of his other companies that were really, really well funded drive themselves into the ground by expecting other things to change instead of taking control over what you can take control over. And so I think it's been a very, very positive outcome. Not easy. Very, very difficult transition, but we are through it, and just having a lot of success. So
I would love for the manufacturing leaders out there that are listening to learn a couple things from you. So you just mentioned this, like you were asked to lead a masterclass. If you were to give that masterclass, what would be the top 1, 2, or 3 things that would be the takeaways, the lessons, if you're going to do this, this is how you do it.
Yeah. So first and foremost, you mentioned when you asked the question that we did it before we had to.
Yeah.
If you have a gun to your head and that gun is a time frame at which you're out of money, then you're not going to make good decisions.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, putting somebody under duress, except putting a whole company under duress, right, for X amount of time, and hopes that an investor might come in and save you, or in hopes that you land that big customer that is not in your control totally. And so many companies do that, and they wait until it's too late. We did it so far in advance, right, that we had total control over what happens next. Mm-hmm. And so by doing that, we didn't have the gun to our head, so we could future plan every aspect of the business from, 5 different financial models that if this happens, then this, if this happens, then this, if this happens, then this. Everything from headcount planning to demand generation to what kind of customers we're going after was all figured out, right? And so, it is, don't wait until the gun is on your head. Mm-hmm. And that's number 1. And number 2, I've already kind of said this, but take control of the things you can control. Mm-hmm. And if it's out of your control, do not rely on it. You can be hopeful, but you should not run your business based off of it.
Yep. 2 great tips. Another thing that came up in your story was that you didn't lose a single customer when you were doing this refocus. So how did you go about doing that? Because I asked you what your investors thought. What did your customers think as you were going through this?
So the customers had questions. Hey, where's the deployment technician that deployed my robot? Why is he not there anymore?
Yeah.
And we explained, because we're moving to a model that the deployment technicians, right, are, not going to be as necessary. Going from having one deployment technician work on one deployment at a time to one deployment technician being able to work on 10 at a time.
Yeah.
That's the kind of scale we need. And so when we explain that to the customers, our customers are our partners. And it's one of our core values is we're a part of our customers' team and they're a part of ours. And so when we talk to them, having already built levels of trust with them over the years that we've worked together, and we say what we're doing, right, they look and say, well, I'm glad that you're making the decisions that will mean you're still going to be around in 10 years, right? That's, and so we've had no complaints, no concerns, as long as we're transparent and explain what's happening.
What should the future of vision solutions look like in the automation world? We're making a big pivot here in the focus of our conversation now, but now that you've gone through this change and you're focused on computer vision technologies, what does the future look like to achieve the type of scale that drove you into this industry and that we need to achieve?
Yeah, so computer vision, when we started the company, was always part of our plans. Mm-hmm. And we had a number of computer vision features that really did quicken the setup time and deployment time for a robot. So for example, Smart Setup was a feature we released, 2 years ago or so, that enabled us to, when we're setting up a robot, roll it up to the machine, and instead of having to reprogram all the waypoints to be exactly the way that they should be on the floor versus when it was in our staging facility here, instead the cameras on the system would look at the surroundings and understand how to adjust all those waypoints. And when something changed in the work cell, they could adjust the waypoints without any reprogramming. But that's about as far as we could go with it at the time, because the level of accuracy required to do a pick and place operation, whether you're loading a machine or putting stuff in a box, you can't miss. And a human doesn't miss. Right. And so in order to get to the level where no matter what the object is, we're able to grasp it, manipulate it, and turn it into a very accurate placement in its end place, that was not something we felt like was attainable reliably 4.5 years ago. But we've been watching as, cameras have gotten better and the, response times of the ARMS SDKs has gotten better. We've been more and more able to look and say vision actually can solve the entire problem, not just the setup problem. And so that's why we're focused on it. And it's the scale and maturity of both the hardware and the software side of things. So everything from how you train the models, which is now, we're working on stuff, for example, that is few shot, take 5 pictures of an object, and we will infer everything about that object so that we don't even have to train models on any specific objects. And that's in the works, and things that just were not even possible 3-4 years ago. And so that enables us to be very confident that we're deploying reliable solutions, meaning it's not going to work it's not going to mess up one out of every 1,000 times. It's not going to mess up at all, right? And making sure that we can do that reliably, that was the vital thing, and that's what's happened in the space that enables us to more focus on that direction.
I'm going to split this next question up into a couple parts. Because I've been asking everyone about artificial intelligence and how that plays into their strategy these days as well. How does AI play into everything that you just talked about? And describe it from like a very pragmatic sense. We don't need to get caught up in any of the fluff.
Yeah.
So that way the audience is digesting these very straightforward applications around AI.
Being pragmatic. We'll take the simplest object, a box with sides, right?
Yeah.
A straight up, box or rectangle box or whatever. So if you wanted to build a model that, would tell the robot how to interact with that box to put it on a pallet or put it in a bigger box or something like that, the old way of doing it would have been to, write every time you get a new box, train the model on that box. What AI has enabled us to do is train our system on what is a box.
Yeah.
Right? And so it knows a box has X amount of sides. It knows that it might have tape on it, might have some labels. It knows it could be brown, it could be white, it could be, plastic, right? It is a box. And so you can put any kind of box through our camera system, and the robot will respond immediately and pick that box up, knowing exactly where the center point is, having defined it as a box, and also having the intent programmed into it. So AI allows us to do intent-based, or what we call human instinct-like actions. So all the things are coming down the conveyor, and they're slightly different places. Old version of robotics, you would have to train the model on every single one of those objects if they're different. In the new version of it, we're like, that's that object, and we know what we're supposed to do. The robot knows what it's supposed to do with that object.
Yeah.
So you can feed 20 different objects down to us, and these kinds of objects go in that box, these kinds of objects go on this conveyor, whatever the case is, and the camera's making the decisions based on the pre-oriented intent and the training that it's received via AI. So that's really the value of where it comes for us.
So one of my last questions in our conversation is, how do you make AI and vision and automation and robotics accessible to the masses?
By making all of the hardware and technology on the software as opaque as possible. So to the customer, they don't care how we build it. They don't care how it works, right? And so by simplifying, another one of our core values, simplicity over complexity, and only showing the customers what they absolutely need in order to make it go and stop. And every other kind of action should be taken automatically. Recovery modes, automatically. So if something goes wrong, instead of the customer having to say something went wrong and send us a support ticket, the arm, we should be able to tell through sensing, force, and torque, as well as the vision, the camera inputs, we know what went wrong. So the arm, because it's intent-based, knows what it needs to do in order to resolve that conflict on the conveyor belt or whatever happened. And so that is huge, right? And I forget what the original question was. You might have to. I did one of those things where I branched off.
Yeah, no. You're good. How do we make it accessible?
Oh, right.
to the masses?
So accessibility is about simplicity.
Yeah.
It's like the Salesforce-ification of robotic deployments. I mean, Salesforce came around and made on-premise software obsolete, and the complexity of standing up your own server farms in order to install, a software platform for your whole company. Those days are over. And prior to those days, it was very expensive to, install proprietary, and customized systems to be proprietary for your needs. And that's what we're bringing to the robotics market, right? Is the deployment of robotics, the deployment should be commoditized, right? The arms are now inexpensive. It's the installation and oversight and management of those arms that is really expensive and time consuming. And so get the commoditization of that, that makes it attractive for our customers. The speed at which we can deploy, the affordability. We have one customer that we're working with in a proposal stage right now that for the same price as one work cell of robots for one of their 100 lines, right, they can get 10 rapid work cells. So that's huge, right? Because if they have 100 lines and it costs them $3 million per line in the traditional sense to put automation there, that's $300 million of CapEx. They might do 1 or 2 a year. Right. And so in our model, they can do 10 of those lines in the year, and it's costs the same amount of money as using a systems integrator.
Yep. And just back to, I think, one of the things that got you into this industry, the more we're able to get those robots out there, the more it's not as much of this capital-intensive, maybe hindering type of project, the more positive impact we're going to have on manufacturing and the GDP and everything that goes along with that.
Exactly.
So I guess my last question then is there anything that we didn't touch on today that you wish we would have covered?
I don't think so. I mean, I told you before this, I'm going to talk. So I think I talked a whole heck of a lot.
Well, I got one for you then, because you mentioned that if we were having a business conversation over a drink, it would be a margarita.
Yes.
So where in San Francisco, maybe specifically in the Mission, where would we be going for that margarita?
Yeah, so
I had to ask. I bookmarked that in my head. I'm like, I'm going to come back to this.
So by far, so I call them vacation drinks.
Yeah.
So I don't drink that often, and so when I do, I'd like to feel like I'm on the beach somewhere, and it's like
Fair.
Not too sweet, but kind of booze heavy, not too sweet, but refreshing, sort of that middle ground. And so the best cocktails, I think, in the city are a place called Liho Yacht Club.
Oh yeah, I've been there. That's a good spot.
They've got the rum cocktails, the Mr. Skipper, if you go, is fantastic. And so that's where I typically find myself, places that have a really good, like well done, tropical drinks.
I wasn't sure if you were going to send us in the direction of one of San Francisco's many iconic tiki bars.
No, because they're too sweet. No. I'm talking like the original Mai Tais and the really good natural margaritas and that kind of stuff. So they're hard to come by, and there's some really really good cocktail bars in the city. But I just I don't live in the city anymore.
Sure.
So I'm a little less connected to them. But Liho is a standard go-to for the food. Also, the food is amazing.
Oh yeah, I remember going there for dinner when I was out here. It's a great spot. For everyone listening, that'll be in the show notes along with how to connect with Jordan and Rapid Robotics. And with that, I just want to say thank you, Jordan, for jumping on today's show.
Man. Thank you. Appreciate
Cheers.
it. You too. Bye.